Welcome to Shepherd's Table. I'm your host, Ian Parkinson, and I have with me today Pastor Shane from St. Peter Lutheran, Pastor Patrick from Heights Baptist, and Pastor Roland from Victory Lutheran. Good morning, gentlemen.
Morning, Ian. Good to see you.
So as a group, you've chosen Bonhoeffer, who was a young man who was a Lutheran. I believe he went through divinity school, for a better word. But Pastor Shane, why Bonhoeffer?
Bonhoeffer is, of course, a very interesting, I wouldn't even call him controversial. I would say he's a very interesting character from recent history.
Right.
The reason I think, I haven't discussed with the others why they would like to discuss Bonhoeffer necessarily, but Bonhoeffer to me is sort of that modern figure in the church that we could look at, who's someone who suffered for the faith, like truly suffered for the faith,
right,
and was very, very much into his own theology, a very, very intellectual individual, but also very, very convinced and convicted of his own faith to the point where he ended up giving up his life for it.
Right.
So, and I don't think there's lots of modern examples, but none that take center stage like he did, because of course he was a pastor during Nazi Germany.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, Pastor Patrick, I mean, I get the impression he was a little conflicted at the beginning in 36 through 39 as Hitler came to power. But then as it moves through the movie, he seems to become more and more convinced of his stance.
Yeah, he was. I mean, Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a man of strong convictions, and obviously there was a process there as he wrestled with matters of faith and theology and what was happening in Germany at the time. I believe that Bonhoeffer is really a man for our age, because he was someone that, as a leader, was willing to step out. You know, I tell people that in life we have two choices. We can stick out our necks, or we can cover our butts.
Yeah.
And most people, leaders, people in positions of leader, they're always kind of covering their butt, deflecting, blaming somebody else. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer, during the war, during the Holocaust, was for a time in the United States and came to study and do ministry and teach. And he had a choice. He was away from the war. He was safe in the United States, and he could have stayed there. He could have said, I'm going to stay here and look after myself and cover my butt. But he said, he was convicted, and he said, no, I need to go back to Germany. I need to stick out my neck. I need to stand with my brothers in the confessing church. And he went back to Germany. And of course, the end result was that he died in a concentration camp. But, so many, I remember during the COVID lockdowns, one pastor, being quoted as saying, well, I'm not going to go to jail. And I think that's a sad comment to make, because Dietrich Bonhoeffer was not only willing to go to prison, he was willing to die.
Yeah.
And what do our convictions mean to us? When we say, I'm not willing to get a ticket, I'm not willing to lose my job, I'm not willing to go to jail, what do we stand for? And I think as leaders, as Christian ministers, we need to say, when it comes to matters of the truth, when it comes to matters of morality and the gospel, we need to be willing to go to jail. Christ was willing to die.
Yes.
And Jesus said to his followers, if you want to follow me, you need to take up your cross and follow me. Mm-hmm. And yet how many Christians today, Christian leaders, pastors, have the attitude, I'm not willing to do that. But I think if we're truly following Christ like Bonhoeffer wanted to, we are willing to die for what we believe in.
Yeah.
And what is true.
Yeah. Pastor Roland, when Dietrich Bonhoeffer was in the States, he was involved in the Black Civil Rights Movement as well.
To some degree, yes. It's interesting because Germany doesn't have the same history with slavery, particularly with African slavery,
right,
as many of the other countries do. Germany didn't really engage in slavery as much, right, as, say, the United Kingdom, the Spain, Portugal, the US, and on, the Netherlands, for example. It's not that slavery didn't ever exist in Germany or that there weren't problems in German colonies in Africa. Of course there were. But it certainly was never the scale or the size. So there were a lot more Germans that viewed slavery as abhorrent.
Yep.
And so yes, Bonhoeffer did spend some time with a lot of African American theologians, pastors. He was very much interested in how they kept the faith and expressed the faith in a place of oppression.
Right.
Because, of course, that was relevant to him, because he was asking the same question of, how do I keep the faith, and how do I, he had been discerning returning to Germany, how do I do that same thing when my government is against me and discriminating against me, and I'm going to be an outcast, and I'm going to be all these things. So I think in many ways Bonhoeffer saw a lot of congruency between the struggle of the black church in the States in the in the Jim Crow era, shall we say, the pre-civil rights era, and he also saw mirrors of that in Germany at the time, because the Nazi government didn't just leave religion alone. Right? They appointed a Reichsbishop to Nazify the church, to sort of minimize the Jewishness of Jesus, to depict him as a sort of Aryan, and to subtly change passages and interpretations in order to fit Nazi propaganda and the Nazi agenda. And people like Bonhoeffer said, hey, hold on a second. Wait a minute. And I think he did take some inspiration from the African church. Now, I do believe you can't stretch that too far. Yeah. So I think there are some scholars personally that try and stretch that too far. But I definitely do think there was some cross-pollination there, 100%.
Yeah, because the church has consistently been involved in pushing back against any oppression. The term that comes to mind for me is Karl Marx. Religion is the opiate of the masses. But he wanted, as it did Hitler, he wanted his own personal religion, for a better word, and the people would stand by it, show up for it. Today, I was reminded of Paul Harvey in his 1996, where the devil's work is turning the churches into government churches. And I've noticed in the last year or so, the Canada Revenue Agency, paid by the federal government of Canada, is starting to seriously consider taking your not-for-profit charity status away from churches. To me, that sounds like it's another nail in the coffin. How do you feel?
I'm of two minds of that, actually. I don't necessarily think it's always a good idea for government to have any involvement in the church at all.
Right.
You hear the expression separation of church and state. It's more of an American thing, to be sure, but it certainly exists here as well. And it's always taken to mean that the church shouldn't interfere in government. Actually, it's quite the opposite. Yeah. In the American understanding of it, it's keeping government out of church is really what the idea behind that is.
Yeah, because the actual line in the U.S. Constitution is the federal government will not establish a religion.
Of course, and it's been convoluted for political reasons, as most things are in the Constitution.
Which is why most pastors try and stay out of politics.
Exactly, yes, because it can get very messy. But yes, the whole idea of being tax exempt and that, it's very, very nice. But on the other hand, anytime you get favors from government, you are to some degree beholden to them.
Yes.
If you take nothing from them, and if you accept that you're going to be taxed, then they have that. They don't have that kind of. They have much less power and influence over a church if they don't. They don't do that. Which is one of the reasons why you have so many problems in Europe with the churches being empty, and they're still standing because the government subsidizes all that.
Right.
But when do you get to a point where it's like this is no longer a church, but a government subsidized organization, right? Yeah.
Where do you stand, Patrick?
Well, it's the whole thing about the relationship between church and state is problematic. And again, I think that God has ordained the state, he's ordained the church, and he's ordained the family. And those are three separate spheres of influence that have their own leadership. You know, the government, and this is the problem we see, the government is overstepping, and it's telling the church how to worship, it's telling families, parents how to raise their children. The issue of parental authority, of course,
Yes.
is certainly a hot button issue this year. But the church, you referred earlier to the church standing up against oppression. And the problem is, I think the more the church is in line with the state, the more it participates in oppression. And we see this historically. And we can look back at apartheid South Africa. And certainly the the Dutch church in South Africa was very much involved in apartheid and participating in that the oppression of the state. We saw the state Lutheran church in Germany, distinct from the confessing church, really being Nazified and participating in the oppression of people. We saw in the United States, certainly during slavery, that there were churches that participated in that slavery agenda. And again, this modern day example, we had, during the COVID lockdowns, governments enforcing, vaccine passports and mask mandates and social distancing mandates and all those sorts of stuff. And a lot of churches participated in that and enforced those mandates and acted as agents of the state and participated in that oppression. And so, I see we can look throughout many examples of history where the church is complicit in state oppression. And that is what was different with Bonhoeffer and the confessing church in Germany, is that, they had to make a choice, and they realized that they had to come out of the state church. They had to form the confessing church because they could not, in good conscience, participate in the oppression of the Nazi state. And so, separation of church and state is important, but, as Shane said, and I appreciate it's not that Christians shouldn't engage in politics, because as Christians, we're citizens.
Yes.
And if we live in a democracy, then Christians have not only the right, but the obligation to participate in public life. But the government needs to recognize that the church and the family are separate spheres of influence.
Okay. Pastor Roland.
Yeah, I would probably take a similar opinion to Pastor Shane about the charitable status for the churches. The fact of the matter is, if we lose charitable status, many churches will close.
Yeah.
They simply can't afford to operate without that. That's just the reality. I'm not saying that that's a for or against thing. That's just the reality. There's a lot of churches hanging on by a thread. There's a lot of churches that could not handle an income tax bill or a property tax bill that would wipe them out. Whether or not churches should have that is a different debate, and I have mixed feelings about that. On the one hand, we've seen it do a lot of societal good because churches can be more effective with the dollars donated to them because they're not giving them to different taxes, and churches have been proven, as the Cardist Institute in Canada has shown decisively, churches are the best organizations for taking a dollar and making it go the furthest. It's not even close. Churches are better than any other charity, any other nonprofit group, certainly any government organization, at taking your dollar and making it go as far as possible. And so there is a distinct benefit. But of course, the flip side, as Pastor Shane has pointed out, is, what the government gives, the government, Caesar's money, Caesar's rules, so to speak, right? And so there is that fear or that concern that because of the charitable status, people will make choices that maybe aren't faithful because they want to preserve that special status. So, but, that's a complicated thing. But I think it's connected to Bonhoeffer in a sense because of his understanding of ethics.
Yeah.
He understood ethics as the original sin, because in the Garden of Eden, in Genesis 3, what did Adam and Eve partake in? The tree of the knowledge of good and evil, right?
Yes.
Okay, so Bonhoeffer's point is, playing ethics is the original sin in a sense, because what you're doing is, instead of God knows what is good and what is evil, I'm going to decide what is good and what is evil. Mm-hmm. And so Bonhoeffer really emphasized that actually we can't do ethics. God alone knows what is good, and therefore we must walk in his way, make decisions in prayer and discernment, and then ask for God's mercy, right? Because we don't necessarily know what is ethical apart from God. So Bonhoeffer believed that the regenerate person, the goal of an ethical life was to live according to the will of God. And he sort of conceptualized this in a nice German word in the Christuswirklichkeit, the Christ reality. So the person of faith lives in the Christ reality and acts accordingly. And that is the true ethical life. Because basically Bonhoeffer said, I don't know if it's right or wrong to oppose Hitler. I don't know if it's right or wrong for me to do this or not, right? Only God knows what is right. But I'm going to proceed according to what I believe is correct, from discernment, from the Bible, from, and God will judge me accordingly. That was sort of Bonhoeffer's opinion. And so I think that is helpful as we wrestle with the ethical issues of our day, where, I wouldn't be so certain we know what right and wrong is. That doesn't mean that there aren't clear cases of right and wrong. Like someone shoots someone else, that's clearly wrong, right? But there's a lot of areas where it's not always as clear as I think we'd like it to be. And I think Bonhoeffer's ethical framework gives us a way of managing that.
Right. You agree with that, Pastor Shea?
Oh, absolutely. And actually, Pastor Roland just gave me a layup there, because it's one of the specific examples I wanted to talk about in Bonhoeffer's term in Germany when he was agonizing whether or not to take part in the Stauffenberg plot.
Right.
And this wasn't a slam dunk for him, because as Pastor Roland pointed out, either way he went with this decision, potentially he was sinning, because he didn't know. So he could take part in the Stauffenberg plot and actively participate in the murder of a human being. As despicable as he might have been, Bonhoeffer still regarded him as made in the image and likeness of God,
right,
regardless of what he did or didn't do while he was on earth. Or he could sit this one out, kind of Pastor Patrick's point here, sitting it out or not participating. And yes, he wouldn't have been involved in a direct murder, but then he is complicit in government action, not only with the murder of the Jews, but carrying this war on to the point of complete European destruction. Right. So he agonized over that. I think one of the principles that he ended up going with is something that Luther brought up when dealing with how do you deal with a law when it conflicts even with itself.
Yes.
Right. When you sin boldly. In other words, no matter what you do in this situation, you're going to sin, right? So pick a lane, go with it, and as Pastor Roland pointed out, and then beg God for mercy later.
Yeah.
Because you don't know which way is actually right.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
Pastor Patrick.
I appreciate that Bonhoeffer wrestled and struggled with whether or not to participate in this plot to assassinate the Fuhrer, Adolf Hitler. Because before God, he wanted to do the right thing, and he weighed out the pros and the cons. Where's the greater sin in killing this man or allowing him to live, and what will be the consequences, and so forth. And I think that that's really what we need to do so often as the church. And I think that the default often is to and again, I talk a little bit more about it than my brothers here, but again, under COVID, and I think the default for a lot of churches was, well, we're gonna obey the government, and I think that churches miss out when we don't wrestle with things and struggle with things, and even in the aftermath of COVID, how many churches have said, okay, you know what, we're going to conduct a review of what we did during COVID. We participated in these mandates and lockdowns and restrictions. Let's do a review. Would we do this again? Do we have any regrets? Would we do anything differently? Do we have anything to repent of? And I think there's so much to be gained. People say it's not just about the destination, it's about the journey.
Yeah.
And that was the thing with Bonhoeffer. He struggled and wrestled and prayed and sought and consulted and studied. And this was all part of his, he wanted to do the right thing so badly. And I think that's what we're missing so often in the church today, is we're not wrestling and struggling in the same way. And even earlier, we talked about the civil rights movement in the in the United States and slavery. And, Martin Luther King said, I have a moral obligation to disobey unjust laws. And I think it's things like that that Bonhoeffer resonated with, because, that was true in his context in Germany too. Yeah. Living under Nazi rule, the regime, the Holocaust, everything that was happening, just like Martin Luther King Jr. in the United States, Dietrich Bonhoeffer in Germany had a moral obligation to disobey unjust laws. And I think both of those men wrestled with that, and in the end, didn't do everything perfectly, but tried to do the right thing before God.
Pastor Roland.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good summary of how Bonhoeffer wrestled through the issues. And the point Bonhoeffer's trying to make is not that there are no ethics, not that there isn't good and evil, not that there isn't things to work against in the world, so to speak, or be against, or be for that matter. But it is that idea of wrestling humbly before God, not being so certain that this is the right thing to do. And I can even think here in the last 20 years, I mean, so often we thought, okay, we're gonna do the right thing.
Yeah.
We're gonna intervene in this conflict, and everyone's gonna be so much better for it. Well, that hasn't worked out all the time, right? Are the people of Afghanistan better off today than they were pre-invasion? I'm not sure. I don't know the answer to that. It's hard to say, right? All I know is, many of our brave men and women didn't come back from that conflict, and a lot of money was spent over there, a lot of effort was spent over there, and because and we had believed we were doing something good, we were doing something right, but was that the case? I don't know. Only God knows. And like I said, I'm not making a moral judgment over that, and I'm not saying, we should have done it or shouldn't have done it. But my point is, when we approach things like that, have a little bit of humility, because maybe we don't know what the right thing was or the wrong thing was. And there's also this law of unintended consequences, right? You think, I'm going to do this, and the result will be that. Sometimes, I think about when they took out Colonel Muammar Gaddafi in Libya and said, well, get rid of that guy, right? And Libya is going to become this democratic paradise. Not quite, right?
Yeah.
All these years later, sadly, it's still considered widely basically a failed state, where different gangs and armed militias just run around unimpeded, killing each other. There's slavery going on, drug trading. Like, it's a terrible, terrible place. Did that make Muammar Gaddafi a good guy? No. But was it right? I don't know. Only God knows. Well, and I think that's the point. Sorry, go ahead.
It's the old axiom, right? Mm-hmm. Man plans and God laughs.
Yeah.
And I mean, Afghanistan has been an absolute failure for 4 empires: the Roman Empire, the Russian Empire, the US failed miserably in there, and I forget the 4th one.
Well, I'm sure the UK must have been involved.
Yes, the British Empire.
Yeah.
Anything else, gentlemen? Anything you'd like to add?
I think I am good. Bonhoeffer is it would take years for us to sit and go through Bonhoeffer properly. He was such an intellect, such a theologian. That it's just very, very difficult to plumb his depths in one sitting.
Well, I have to admit, I'm going to go home and watch it again.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good
Pastor
idea.
Patrick.
Yeah. Well, and even beyond watching the movie, I'd encourage you to read his biography. I read the full biography by Eric Metaxas.
It's a very good one. It's a very good one. Yeah.
I'm not a historical expert on Bonhoeffer, but I would encourage people. There are a lot of Bonhoeffer's original writings contained in that biography. And as you read it, ask yourself, how would Bonhoeffer view what's happening today in the church and in the world?
Yes.
And I think there's a lot that we can take from his example.
Excellent.
And I would just say, for pastors and theologians, if you really want to get to the core of Bonhoeffer's theology and what he based everything on, you have to read his a book that collects his Christological lectures called Christ the Center.
Right.
That book basically helps you to understand the entire theological imagination of Bonhoeffer and why he came to the conclusions that he did on certain things.
Yeah. Actually, I have an interesting question. Maybe you can answer it quick. How much reading do you do?
Not as much as I should. Well, all of us have to read to a certain degree during the week just to prepare a sermon.
Right.
But besides that, maybe once a week at home, I might flip through like a Dickens novel or something, right?
Just for something different.
Yes. Yeah.
Pastor Patrick.
Yeah, not as much as I should, and I differentiate. I mean, there's certainly recreational reading I'll do, novels, and on holidays and things like that. But reading the news, reading Bible commentaries, preparing for Sunday, and as well reading other books that have to do with church and culture. So it's a variety, but probably not as much as I should or as I used to.
I think we can all say that. Pastor Roland.
Yeah, I'll say it too. I don't read as much as I should, but I probably read about a book a week, and then several journal articles, news articles, and stuff. So I would say probably 300 to 600 pages a week.
Wow.
But I mean, that's kind of my thing to do. I don't have hobbies. I don't have a life.
Excellent. Thank you for coming in, gentlemen.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for watching Shepherd's Table.